Gray, welcome. This is your study that you donated your sailing collection, your book collection. I'm Glenn Darden, and I am sitting with Gray McGowan, a longtime Fourth Boat Club members, both of us. Gray, a touch longer than I. And we're here to talk about the history of the club and Gray's recollections of people and places and boats and the history of how we've come to where we are. Gray?
Of course, you have to start down on Lake Worth, where the boat club started. And I think those people don't know this, but the boat club owes a great deal to Ruth and Marion Herring. And they had a marina down on Lake Worth, and I think that's where the founders all met each other and had fun at Marion Herring and Ruth Herring's marina on Lake Worth. Lake Worth was, I don't know when they started the marina, but it was after 1914 when Lake Worth was originated.
So that was 1929, is that?
The club was supposedly founded in 1929, and that was the Fort Worth Boat Club. But before that, they gathered around the Herrings Marina, and the Herrings started a club. And to belong to the club, you had to buy a boat from the Herrings. I think those are the beginnings, and there's a wonderful deposition in the library with Dad and Marion Herring claiming that each one was the founder of the boat club. They had some great friends, and the guys that are the founders are in that photograph in the hallway. And they were all arm around the shoulder buddies. And they all, I think, met each other at Lake Worth at Ruth and Marion Herring's marina. And I wish I knew more about the marina down on Lake Worth, but I don't. And there's some photographs in the history cookbook that show the docks and boats on Lake Worth. I think Longhorns.
Lake Worth was the original site for the Fort Worth Boat Club.
Yes, in 1929, the Fort Worth Boat Club was formed at the site of the Ruth and Marion's Boat Works. But I don't know that much about it, but there's some stuff in the original history and cookbook that you can buy here at the club. And I think some of the Longhorn sailboats sailed down on Lake Worth, but I'm not 100% certain.
But the Snipes sailed there, is that right? Or what boats were they sailing?
I think the Snipes were later on. I don't know whether there were Snipes down there or not, but they might have been. And I'm just trying to think, when the Snipe class started, I think it was 1931.
Okay, so it was later.
Yeah. Yes, and the Snipe was designed by a wonderful man named Bill Crosby, who was the editor of Rudder magazine, and it was the premier sailing magazine. So he got the idea of building a home-built boat, and the Snipe became the original trailer sailor, because it was easy to launch off and on a trailer, and the way he designed the boat, it was easy to build. And L. Francis Herreshoff, he used to build models of his boats and take the lines off of them before he had to make sure the model looked right, and that would make sure the boat was right.
That's beautiful. Let's go back to the founders and tell me how they put this club together.
I think they all got together on Lake Worth at the marina. There is a deposition in the library of the founders, and Marion Herring and Dad argued over who was the founder. And Dad said, "You were, Marion." And he said, "Oh, no, you were, George." But what happened was the Herrings didn't have the money to advertise, so they formed this club, and to belong to the club, you had to buy a boat from them. And I think that's the beginnings of the boat club.
A commercial venture.
Yeah. And it's just amazing, when Eagle Mountain Lake filled up, Marion and Ruth moved their marina to Eagle Mountain Lake. Now, how they managed to do that is beyond me, but they did. And when they died back in the 60s, they were multimillionaires, but at one point they were living in a tent at Lake Worth next to a tree, and they had a payphone nailed into the tree. And one of the things that Ruth did, she was a great hydroplane racer, and her husband, Marion, souped up the engines. He was a master mechanic. And there's a photograph of Ruth in the dining room. Chicago River Yachting Magazine hired the dean of yachting photographers, Morris Rosenfeld. He had to get on the train and go to Chicago to take Ruth's picture. And the year the picture was made, she won the national championship in her class. She was amazing. She was the first liberated woman.
Yeah.
She took the men on and blew them off into the weeds.
High speed for sure.
And she also set some world hydroplane records for speed. I forgot that. The photograph that's in the library was blown up almost life size and was in the eatery at the Boat Works for years. And I remember seeing it as a kid and saying, Dad, what is that? That's Ruth Herring.
The club moved from Lake Worth to Eagle Mountain, and this was a lake.
I'm guessing 92.
Okay. And the land was donated.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Amazing thing happens is that Mr. Burgess, whose daughter was Louise Logan, approached this group of men who were all under 30 years old and were members of the boat club on Lake Worth, and said, I will give you the land to build a yacht club. And fortunately, some of those young guys had the resources, and they solicited help and built the original club, which includes the current dining room. And the bar used to be in the room where the employees rest. And in there was a bar and slot machines. And local gamblers didn't like the slot machine, so they broke into the club one time and threw all the slot machines in the lake. And there's some wonderful stories about those early days of the club. And of course, it was against the law to have a bar in Texas, so they had a private club that owned each member's whiskey, and they were allowed to pour the drinks as long as they weren't selling them. So they had a special place to have the booze and everything. I can remember that as a toddler going in and playing with the slot machines. It was really a lot of fun.
Before they built the clubhouse, they had to build a road to access it.
Now, we were trying, do you think it was Highway 199?
I can't remember the highway.
But anyway, it's what's now called Boat Club Road. But from that highway, there was no road to where the boat club sit. The original founders went to the county commissioner, and he agreed to build the road to the boat club property. And so what happened was he wasn't elected. And they went to see him and said, what should happen? What do we do now? And he said, if you start the road before December 31st, my successor will have to build the road. So about 10 or 12 guys and a bulldozer and a lot of whiskey in December went out and started the road with the bulldozer. And I guess they had maybe a plan that the commissioner, who was not reelected, had made, so they knew in which direction to push the dirt. But anyway, they had a lot of whiskey and a lot of fun starting the road to the boat club.
It's improved over the years.
Yeah. And of course, it's under reconstruction now.
Scraping the top. Let's talk about the early sailing. The snipe was integral in the early sailing. Hub Isaacs.
I checked the other day, and I think there are now 30,000 snipes in the world, and the class is still going strong, only surpassed by the laser.
Sure.
And so it's still a going concern, and the snipes were a lot of fun to sail. Dad had number 1515, and he became a great friend of Bill Crosby, who would come to the club occasionally and talk to the membership.
The designer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He was a wonderful man and was also editor of Rudder magazine, which at the time was a leading yachting magazine in the United States.
Sure.
And the interesting thing about the snipe was he designed it in such a way that you could buy a piece of wood that was long enough to make the boat from the lumber yard. And you didn't have to scarf planks together or anything like that. He really was a brilliant guy, and later on the boat club realized that snipes weren't a great way to promote yachting. And that was what Dad's idea was. The boat club should promote yachting. And that means in ski-doos and surfboards and any vessel on the water that's not used commercially as a yacht. So that included sailboats, power boats, And my father loved sailing, but he also loved power boating, and he and his friends built a 25-foot power boat. There's pictures of her around the club, and there's a model of her in the entertainment room at the boat club.
What's the name? What was the name of the boat?
Oh, he named the boat, let me think, he named it Cuspidor because everybody liked to use it, but nobody wanted to clean it up.
I have not heard that story. That's fabulous. Just carrying on with the sailing, Hub Isaacs, who was a just instrumental member, a fabulous
He
member
was,
of the club.
and he was a snipe champion and Commodore of the snipe class. And he got into the class early, and his boat was number 9. And he bought subsequent boats, but Bill Crosby was running the show, and so his later boats were still number 9. I sailed with him a lot, mostly on White Rock Lake.
Mm-hmm.
And Hub was so bright, we waxed him. Of course, I didn't have any idea what I was doing. He said, one day he said, "McGowan, you don't know blank from Shinola." He taught me how to swear.
I think that the World Championship trophy for the snipe class is the Hub Isaacs trophy.
Yes, that's correct. And he was Commodore of the class.
Okay.
And he was a wonderful man, and he was my father's best friend. Or maybe after Skinny, he was Dad's best friend. And I'm talking about Evander also.
And what other club members in those early days sailed the snipes?
The Hill brothers were, I don't know whether they were snipe sailors, but they were early members of the boat club.
Mm-hmm. And founders.
And there is a picture in the hallway of the founder sitting on the steps where the swimming pool is now, and you can see who the founders are. And in the picture is my father and his brother Harry, Ray Wyatt. Who are some of the other people? Oh, and Dad is sitting next to an attorney, and I can't remember his name, but they were bitter enemies, and it's funny that they ended up having their picture sitting next to each other.
Mr. Haltom, wasn't he a founder, Mr. Haltom?
I think he was,
Haltom?
yes.
Yeah.
And I think he's in that photograph.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, they were amazing guys, and they got together. None of them were over 30 years old, and made a deal to buy some land on the lake for zero money. And they got, I think, what did we guess? 10 acres and 1,400 feet
12
of frontage.
acres or so, yes.
Each one of those feet now is worth maybe $500. The property is really fabulous.
It's quite a gift by the Burgess family.
It was, and if you look at a map of Eagle Mountain Lake, strategically, it's the nicest place on the lake. It's wonderful. It's protected from the northwest, and the prevailing wind is out of the southwest, and that's the way the club faces. Mr. Burgess is really one of the heroes of the founding of the, not the founding, but the existence of the club.
Existence of the club, for sure.
And his daughter, Louise, was well known by everyone, and she was married to my father's law partner. And Louise was a great America's Cup fan, even going to Australia to watch some of the races. She was a cup watcher.
Amazing.
When she died, I had fun writing her obituary, and it was published in Yachting, I think. I'm not real sure, but anyway, I got letters from all over Australia, all New Zealand, all the people that knew Louise as a result of her cup watching.
Huh.
Some of them were here for the World Youth Championship.
Yes, in the 80s.
And the guys that were here all ended up on 12-meter boat trying to get the cup.
And succeeding, they did. That's right. There was racing here, but a lot of the early members traveled to the coast, got on bigger boats, and sailed ocean races. Is that right?
That's right. And I think Dad was one of the pioneers, because we used to race Sugar 2 that had won the race in 1936. In the 40s and early 50s, we raced back and forth from Galveston to Corpus Christi.
Yes.
We never won any trophies there. We got some little tiny trophies, but we didn't set the world on fire.
Well, you got some good experience.
We had some wonderful times. I remember one night we launched the boat in Galveston and raced to Corpus Christi, and we sailed the boat back. And Dad had a couple of shooters, and we rounded the jetties, and he insisted we were headed north, and he insisted we were headed south. We got in the channel, and we kept giving him the buoy numbers that indicated we were headed north, and he said, "No, you've got to turn this thing around."
Oh boy.
Dad. Finally, he agreed, and we got into Seabrook in one place in the middle of the night.
A little scarier down the road with the offshore rigs and things like that.
Now,
And
repeat that.
the offshore rigs, more obstacles in the Gulf as days went by.
It was pretty simple. We raced out to a oil well derrick in the Gulf, and you went around it coming from Corpus or headed for Corpus. You went around it first. So it was an easy course. But when the wind blew up out of the southeast, it was a wild ride to get from Galveston to Corpus Christi.
Yeah.
If it blew hard when you were going to Galveston, it was wonderful.
That was the Chevron rig, I bet, the Chevron race,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Now, one of our members, Andy Green, I worked for him for a few years selling Olympic-class sailboats. He and his wife were terrors in that circuit, in the Texas Ocean Racing Circuit. They won it a couple of times.
They really were.
Yeah.
And Andy Green.
It's amazing. He and his wife built more sailboats than Nathaniel Harshaw.
Good grief.
Hundreds of boats, all Olympic-class boats. Some were a day sailor called a Mustang.
Yeah.
And it was a privilege to work for him. I had a lot of fun. And Ted Turner owned an interest in the business for a while.
Because Andy was Ted's crew on the Flying Dutchman.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The Flying Dutchman is a fabulous boat to sail. It will plane to windward, and it's pretty exciting. And, of course, when you get off the wind and set the spinnaker, you can outrun a hydroplane. They're really fabulous boats.
Beautiful boats. And that's what Paul Forster won an Olympic medal in the Dutchman. And then...
Now, I'm trying to think. Buddy Melgus, what boat did he sail? It was a Dutchman, I think.
He did in
he won a couple
64.
of Olympic medals.
He got I think they got a bronze medal with the Dutchman, but later won a gold medal in the Soling. Yeah.
His book is in the library here, and in the preface he said, I don't want to kid you. If you want to go into the Olympics, you better sail every day before you go to the trials. He said, there's no substitute for hard work.
Yeah.
I was disappointed. I figured I'd read some pointers in the book and become a great sailor, and it turns out you got to do like you're digging ditches.
Yeah, just work harder. What other sailing can you remember from those good old days?
I grew up in the Beetle Cat, and Lewis Winter named him the Dogies. I was horrified. But Lewis was quite a character, and he had a rendering plant, and he slipped in one of the machines and lost a leg as a result of it.
Right.
But he still drove himself to the hospital, get himself patched up. And he was a fixture around here, but he was the one that insisted the Beetle Cat should be called Dogies, since we had the Longhorns.
They weren't designed by Crosby, though.
No.
The Beetle Cats, okay. That was just a classic Beetle Cat.
I'm trying to think. Mr. Beetle, I think, designed them. But don't quote me
that's
on that.
probably right. Yeah. I guess we moved on we had Longhorns, Snipes, and Falcons followed that, right? Falcon was a keel boat.
If the club wanted to promote yachting, they needed a boat that a family could sail and day sail. And so they went from center boarders to keel boats, and I think that was the reason behind the Longhorn.
Okay.
Now, there's a wonderful picture of one of the first Longhorns framed, and it's in the dining room. And the founders are all standing around grinning from ear to ear, and they're on South Main Street in a carpenter shop.
Oh, boy. Built in a carpenter shop.
Yeah, on South Main Street. That's where the boats came from. I don't know whether they sailed at Lake Worth. They may or may not have. Anyway, after the Longhorns, they did the Falcons, and they were fabulous boats. They were probably some of the first fiberglass boats ever made. And they were beautiful boats, and several of them are still sailing, and maybe a Longhorn or two.
I've seen, we have a Longhorn somewhere in the back lot, I think.
All those boats were built to be good race boats, but good day sailors too, so that the club could promote yachting, including power boats. And that's been the whole focus of the club, and I hope it continues to be that way, to promote life on the water safely, go out and come back without any bumps or grinds or frightening experiences.
There were some beautiful power boats at the club there have been over the years. And the West Texan, the Eamon Carter's lovely.
Was she 38 feet or something like
Rough,
that?
yes, I think so.
She was gorgeous. And of course, Eamon Carter, was Mr. Fort Worth for years. He started the television station Channel 5, and he was the owner of the Star Telegram. And he owned land all the way from the Shady Oaks Clubhouse, Lockheed Martin, all the way to Eagle Mountain Lake. The vast, it's probably about 10 miles long.
Right.
And when World War II started, he gave the government the land to build Consolidated Vultee that built all the B-24s that fought in Europe and some in Asia. And he was a great man, and he was in competition with Dallas, and he was purportedly, if he had to go to Dallas on business, he took his lunch in a sack. So he didn't have to promote a restaurant in Dallas. He was a partisan Fort Worth guy.
He certainly was.
And he had that magnificent West Texan. And I think at one point she was the biggest powerboat on the lake, and gorgeous. All mahogany, deck house and transom, and those old Chris Crafts were a lovely boat. Incidentally, in the library, there is a brief history of Chris Craft boat. And maybe there's a 38-footer in there. We'll have to peel through and see.
The Brants had a beautiful powerboat. The Scarboroughs, they had some just lovely.
Yes, I wish I knew more about that. And Paul and George Brant had a beautiful boat. And they built the cabana right on the northeast corner of the parking lot.
Was that cabana number 1?
I think number 1 was Hub's.
Okay.
And
your dad's was number 2?
No, I think the Brants were number 2.
Okay.
And Dad and John Howell built that cabana, and it was owned by Jetcal for a while. And then when it went public, Dad bought John's interest out, and he owned it. And we sold it, and it'd been in the family for 47 years. And it was a hard sale. That was in 2005.
And the cabanas are a big part of the club.
They really are. There were a lot of people who were resentful of the cabana owners and said they were freeloading on the club, but a check of the bills, the cabana owners spent more money in the club than the non-owners. So that silenced the critics.
They've been a big addition to the club.
It's a fabulous thing. I ended our honeymoon in 19 the same time the Rhodes 19s arrived in the harbor.
Okay.
And it was fun to see the trucks bringing the boats in and pick him up with a crane and launching them.
It seems, looking back, that period of time, the 60s and 70s, was a real high point for activity, for participation for sailing. Yeah.
I don't know this for a fact, but I think there are more powerboat owners here than there are sailboat owners.
That might be true.
What we need to do here is promote yachting, and that includes all kinds of boats. I worry about the auxiliary fleet. I don't see too many new boats there. And there are some fabulous 25 and 35-foot sport boats that you can day sail on and also race and have a lot of fun. I don't know what's happened to the sailors. I think they've gotten lazy. I know I have, but I still own a sailboat.
Yeah.
It's at the dealer's lot, but I still own it.
The Wednesday night races out here and the 22s are still highly competitive. So lots of activity there.
That's right. And then that's our current fleet.
Yes.
And they sail them dry too, aren't they, up out of the water. It's amazing. A fiberglass boat over the years can soak up nearly 5% of its displacement in water.
That's a lot of weight.
Yeah.
We think about that at regattas when the boat's in the water, stays in the water for 4 days, but everybody's treated the same, right?
The main thing for the boat club to do is get people out on the water and back safely.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that the powerboat people used to do is have a predicted log race. And what they do is they set out a course, and you predict the time that it'll take to get to it. And then the day of the race, the guy that comes closest to his prediction wins the trophy. And it brings the powerboats out in mass, and some of the auxiliaries too. They can do the course.
Yes.
So we need to promote that.
Is it still going on?
I don't think so, but I'm not aware of the predicted log race now, but it's something that ought to be looked into. First off, it'll fill up the bar after it's over. And the second thing is everybody will have a lot of fun.
Let's move to how in the world did the Fort Worth Boat Club and Inland Sailing Club get involved in the America's Cup?
That's an interesting thing. My father was a great America's Cup fan, and in 1958, he got us a berth on the, can't remember the name of the ship, but we went out and watched Columbia defeat the, I can't remember the name of it, I think it was Scepter, was the British challenger. And Briggs Cunningham won in 4 straight races. But we could hardly see the boat. But we were there watching it, and Dad was a big fan. But I think the man that was really responsible for America's Cup enthusiasm in the beginning was Perry R. Bass, Commodore Bass. And I think he belonged to some of the 12-meter syndicates. And then, of course, we had O.L. and Lee Pitts, who built a 12-meter to try to win the club, the trophy back for the United States. And there's a deposition with Lee and O.L. discussing that boat in the library.
Courageous. Or did they get involved with Mariner?
Their boat was America II, I think.
That was the last one, for sure. So
they may have been members of the syndicates earlier, but that was their deal.
Yeah.
And they had a tough time. They got down to Australia, and the boat looked tender. And who was a wonderful guy who was the skipper?
John Coleus.
John Coleus. And he said, she's tender. And they got to checking around and found out that the keel was lighter than it was supposed to be. So it was amazing. They had a new keel cast in the United States and air freighted to Australia to put on the boat. It's an incredible story. Unfortunately, they were behind the curve at that point, and they weren't selected to challenge for the Cup.
That was a full-out effort, though. They had a two-boat program.
Yeah, Sparkman Stevens designed the boat. I've always been suspicious about why that light keel got on the boat, because Sparkman Stevens had people they preferred, and that would be Bus Mossbacher and his group. And Bus Mossbacher is an amazing story in itself. But anyway, they weren't successful, but they gave it everything they had. Imagine America's Cup contender belonging to the Fort Worth Boat Club. It's a great story.
It is a great story. And, of course, the Cup is just continued. The technology is amazing. The boats don't look like boats anymore, and certainly aren't in the water.
When we get into the discussion of evolution of sailing, we'll kick the new boats around.
Yeah, I'd like to do that. On the technology side, we saw centerboards going to keel boats for our club transition. The lasers came in. The juniors really jumped into the lasers, and most of the good sailors that I know and grew up with spent a lot of time in lasers.
I had a laser. I was 35 years old, and after the first beat to windward, my stomach muscles were gone, and I'd capsize after that.
It was quite an athletic boat, for sure.
You had to be tough to sail a laser, and a lot of kids got tough doing it.
Yeah, it was fun, and it allowed, it was a path for a lot of our sailors to travel and to go to different ports to race and get experience.
And the boat club's still doing it with the junior class.
They are that. Our junior program has always been a good program, from the Dogies to now.
It has, and my father got a big kick out of teaching juniors. There's some photographs of him down on the dock with all these young kids, and my father loved it, and the kids did too.
You, I'm sure, remember, I do, when I first met your father, he would, if you could tie a bowline behind your back, he'd buy you a Coca-Cola. It took me a while, but I got the Coke.
And the bowline is the best not to know on a boat.
Absolutely, yeah.
And he had a technique called a rolling bowline, where he would take his hand and place it on, flip it over around the thing and down, roll it in like that. It was really fun to watch him do it.
He was quite a man.
He was a wonderful guy. And he was wonderful to his children. He always kept us coming to the boat club and kept us involved with the boat club. and his motto was promote yachting.
He did a good job and had there a lot of
I think he did too.
people to follow. Dick Williamson, my father-in-law, had a great career offshore sailing.
He
and
did,
took a
and
lot of people.
wasn't he the first guy to take his boat, Mary Gale, to the Southern Ocean racing circuit?
Could have been.
Now, my
Florida.
father and Hub used to race in the SORC with Howard Cole from Houston. And it reminds me of a great trip that Howard and Hub Isaacs took. We will talk about that later.
We talk about it now.
All right, Hub and Howard decided they wanted to race in the Transpac, and Howard had a 40-foot cow. And they sailed the boat from Houston to the Panama Canal and up the coast of Mexico to Los Angeles. And then their crew came aboard and they raced to Honolulu. And while they were in Mexico, they pulled in this port, and the crew of Stormvogel, which was a South African brand new planing 72-footer, was there. And Hub had raced Ticonderoga several times in the race from St. Petersburg to Havana. And he loved the big tie. And these guys said, we've come to do two things. We want to smash Ticonderoga, and we want to win the race. And Hub said, you've got your hands full. Maybe you'll win the race, but you won't beat Ticonderoga. They were incensed, and Ticonderoga was built in 1928. Stormvogel was built in 1960. And so it was an old boat against the new boat, and they raced within sight of each other to Honolulu, and Ticonderoga pipped them by an hour and a half.
Good grief.
They raced 2,200 miles and they could see each other.
Yeah.
It was a great story. And of course, Hub, if you read the history of Ticonderoga, there's a photograph of Hub in Havana receiving the first to finish trophy in the race. It's a lot of fun. Ticonderoga had a magnificent history.
That was a great destination back in the old days. I'm sorry you can't. There have been a few races in the last few years, but it's very hard to get to Cuba.
I don't think it's that hard, but who wants to go? Castro and his friends have wrecked the thing, and the economy in Havana is so bad now, they're just on subsidence. Just horrible story.
That's tough. What other topics would you like to touch on?
Maybe the way sailboats were and the way they are now.
Let's do that.
It was a lot of fun to look at boats. Ticonderoga was a catch, and off the wind, she was untouchable. And the catch rig, yawl rig, are really good. I just brought some new books into the library about the Concordia yawl. She was designed by C. Raymond Hunt, who designed this magnificent sailboat that won the Bermuda race a couple of times and beat everybody on it. So it's a great story, and it's all contained in 3 books called My Life in Boats by Waldo Hallam. The Concordia yawl was supposedly the most beautiful boat ever designed, and she could win races like crazy.
They're gorgeous. And I don't know if they still make them, but the boat yard is still there.
I think
in
they
Buzzards
built
Bay.
120 of them, and most of them are still sailing.
Yeah.
They were all built in Holland what's the name of the big yard in Holland for yachts?
Huisman?
Yeah. Anyway, it's a great story, and if you want to see yachting history, look in the library for the Waldo Hallam book.
You're making a lot of plugs for this library.
Yeah.
The technology is certainly racing.
The thing that I noticed in offshore boats, they have decided to get rid of overlapping jibs so they can have a very narrow trim angle and go to windward better, and the rest of the sail area is in the mainsail. That's the big thing that I see. And of course, lighter and lighter displacement and
asymmetrical spinnakers, things like that.
The asymmetrical spinnakers revolution downhill racing because you have to tack back and forth to keep the speed up.
It's great tactically in small boats and, of course, in ocean racing as well.
Yes. And of course, I guess the most impressive thing is the wonderful, what do you call the things that go down in the water and the boats lift up out of the water? I can't think.
The foilers. Yeah, foils.
The foils, yeah. Yes. And at the America's Cup, you've got 72-foot sailboats that approach 50 knots. The best thing a 12 could do was maybe 12 or 14 off the wind, and these boats are going to do 50 knots.
You're being kind to the 12 on the 14 knots, but surfing, yes.
There is a wonderful picture of Columbia. Briggs Cunningham is steering in there, close reaching, and the spray and everything it kicks up. It's a fabulous photograph that Rosenfeld took.
Rosenfeld.
And I'm trying to think how to access that photograph. Oh, I sent an article into the monthly newsletter, and there's a picture of her there. But I don't think they've printed it yet. Anyway, it was a story about Briggs Cunningham, who was an amazing sailor. He was the first successful defender of the America's Cup after World War II. And he also built his own cars and raced them at the Le Mans 24-hour race. Right. Incredible man.
Certainly was. And the Cunningham is named after him, a sail control on the mainsail.
That's right.
He
figured that
out, yes. It is wild to see what's happening in the America's Cup and in sailing in general. And foiling, if it brings more people to the sport, is great. And the foiling actually began with small boats, with
and
the Moth and
I think there's
14-footers.
There's some production boats with foils in the 25 to 30-foot range that you can buy now.
I think they can go all the way up. Catamarans, foiling catamarans, where it started in the Cup. And then now it's foiling monohulls that kind of look like crickets, but they go 50 knots. Yeah.
The wonderful thing that I noticed this year was, I think it's called the Archaea series, where a series of 600-foot trimarans sailed around the world nonstop with one skipper. Can you imagine being alone on a 100-foot trimaran making 25 knots? I would be terrified. No. And the sounds must be incredible with all the crashing and bashing.
It is wild, but the materials are lighter. Most of these boats are built of carbon. So the boats, you don't have as much mass to push. The foils are more efficient.
And you can build boats now that you couldn't build before out of wood, out of carbon fiber, that can really make a big difference as far as the displacement and strength is concerned.
No doubt.
And the lack of displacement is the thing that makes boats really go.
Yeah.
It's fun to watch. And it's interesting, if you look at the history of the America's Cup, and up in the top of the library is Lawson's History of the America's Cup, which is a famous book about the Cup. And you go through there and you watch and involve the J-class sloops and the 12 meters and these current boats is really the history of technology and yachting.
Yes.
And it's amazing to think the J-class sloops are still sailing. They're roughly 130 feet overall.
Magnificent. Yeah.
With a stick maybe 200 feet tall. They're just amazing boats. And they will be in Barcelona for this America's Cup in August. And hopefully, while they're racing, they'll have good coverage of the J-class sloops.
I bet there will.
They aren't that fast, but they're the most majestic yachts ever built.
Certainly are. Let's talk about some of the great characters and people.
One of the things about Glenn was she was a grand sailor, and when she won the women's national championship, it was great publicity for the Fort Worth Boat Club. And, of course, Glenn had a wonderful time. And your mother used to sail with Glenn, not when she won the championship, but in subsequent
She sailed
campaigns
with her when the club hosted the women's national championship, the Adams Cup, in 1969. They were here, and they finished second, so they didn't win. But I do remember Glenn port tacking the fleet in one race, and it was just magnificent. Great to see.
She could sail a boat, and she knew tactics.
She really did.
And she put us on the map when she won the national championship. And, of course, there was a guy here named Glenn Darden who put us on the map when he won the world champion Lightning.
We can talk about that later. Let's talk about Bill Prowatt. How about?
The thing I remember about Bill Prowatt was that he was a pilot for private planes, and he had a boat, and there was a race from Galveston down to one of the Mexican ports. And he was the navigator, and he was shooting sun lines, and it was long before Loran and so on and so forth. but he got into the wrong port. He navigated not to the finish line, but another port. So when they realized what had happened, they had to sail another 75 miles down the coast of Mexico to finish the race.
He had a boat here called Adios,
Yes.
which was one of the more outrageous crews on the lake, for sure.
But they did their work and they won a lot of races.
They won a lot of races.
I'll never forget. My father bought a boat called the Santa Cruz 27.
Yes.
And she was a lot faster than Bill's boat. And we sailed past them, and not out of skill, just out of boat speed that the boat produced. And I remember getting the evil eye from Bill. And we ended up together again on the course, and he left us up and fouled us out of the race. And he said, aha.
I think Bill's boat, the Adios, and their fabulous crew drank more Pearl beer than any bar in Texas. And as I recall, in the 60s, they would drink the beer and throw the cans in the lake. And at a certain point, either the Lake Patrol or some authority said no more. And there were no more beer cans thrown from at least Adios in our fleet.
I think the guy that ran the Lake Patrol's name was Bentley. And he had to chastise me several times late at night. I was 14 years old with a group of kids. None of us should have been there. And he said, I think you guys better head back to the club. So we did. He was a great guy.
Dick Williamson was a big leader in the offshore sailing. Fabulous gentleman. And he and his brother Don was Commodore. Their father got them into sailing.
Both of them were Commodores, Dick and Don.
Okay.
When Mr. Williamson bought an Alden 35-footer, and he named the boat after his two daughters-in-law. And the boat was called Marygale. And they sailed a lot of races, and Dick took her down to the SORC, and they didn't win the whole regatta, but they were up in the noise a lot. And I think he was probably the pioneer guy from the boat club in the Southern Ocean racing circuit.
I think in offshore in general.
Yeah.
They went to England with the Swan 44 and Hawaii with the Chance 58, all named Stuart Little. Just a fabulous line of boats.
I didn't realize he'd done the Transpac.
Yes.
85. There's a test tank model of the boat in the hallway, and it's been turned into a trophy, and it has a lot of plaques on it, but it's a long, gray, speedy boat.
Mm-hmm.
Britton Chance was a genius, except sometimes he missed, and you'll see Perry's boat that Britton Chance did with the chopped off transom or underwater transom. In the test tank, it tested really fast, and when they towed the boat over 10 knots, it was really fast, but they never got that speed up when they were sailing. So they had the wrong Mach number, or what am I thinking? What's the number for displacement sailboats? There's a number. Anyway, Terry was wonderful to build that boat, and I think the model of her was Perry boat. Donation to the club. Anyway.
Mariner, was that the boat?
Yes.
Or? Yes. Okay.
I think Terry was the guy that is responsible for the boat club and the America's Cup relationship. And he did some great things. And of course, the thing that I think is heroic that Perry did with Ted Turner was they won the World's Ocean Racing Championship, which is a story in itself. And for years, the model of American Eagle has been sitting there and no one knew why. So now there's a plaque describing her winning the World's Ocean Racing Championship.
And Mr. Bass got the Navigator's Trophy.
Commodore Bass. Who was Commodore of the club, Commodore of the Snod class. And he was quite a guy. When he was at Yale University, he built a snipe while he was studying and ended up Commodore of the Snod class and Commodore National Champion. He could sail.
He was a good sailor, no question. Any other people you'd like to bring up that were...
I like Glenn Darden. I think you've done some colorful things at the boat club. and your father and your mother.
Yeah,
I'm so sorry they're gone.
I am too. My brother grew up here. We had a fabulous junior program at the time. The Lindsays, David Lindsay.
And it's
Some of-
we have a full-time professional running the junior class now. So we're fortunate to have that program here at the club.
It's still a very strong program.
Yeah.
Yes. Here we're sitting in this beautiful library. The club has been redone. The team and the membership just rallied behind that. And we have a shiny club after so many years of needing to redo the club.
Clubhouse was getting long in the tooth.
Long in the tooth, but not anymore.
I remember trying to put the Venetian blinds up in the dining room, and the string broke, and the whole thing fell down on my feet.
Was that in the 60s or the 70s?
No,
or?
it was about 2 years ago.
I could have been. We have a fabulous facility, and
The
marching.
leadership of the club should be congratulated for what they accomplished.
Yes, I
Carl
agree.
Beach did the design, and who was Commodore when they raised the money to do it? They all ought to get a gold
It
star.
was under several people. Rick Schaefer, Willard, very important. Mark Smith, of course, and several Commodores before that. So it really
who was
has been-
Commodore when we had the meeting out on the terrace to decide whether to spend the money or not? Can you recall who that was?
I don't recall, but I remember only one person standing up against it.
We're shaming him because he led this boat club into the facility that we have now.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's
I'm
just incredible.
embarrassed. I was going to think of his name. But you're our hero. Remember that.
This has been a great conversation, Gray. I really appreciate your time, appreciate all the contributions you and your brother and your father, the McGowan family, has given to this club.
I can assure you it's been a lot of fun to do what we've done. And I know it made my father's life when he'd had these terrible responsibility with the law practice. He could come to the boat club and let his hair down. And he said it added years to his life.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that's an experience that a lot of members have had. This is a great place to blow off steam.
I agree with that.
We're lucky to be here, and we're lucky the founders decided to build the club, and the current leadership is doing a fantastic job. And the only thing I can think is to keep doing what you're doing for the future.
That's right. Thank you very much, Gray.
You're welcome, and I'm pleased to be here and visit with you.
Yeah, very fun.